welcome you and introduce my mentor and the person who started Translation Studies Department at our university, Professor Gdański.
Thank you very much. I'll be responsible for the formal opening of today's conference. And on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to greet everybody, especially our guests from abroad who came from several different countries in Europe. We're very, very happy to have you here. I hope you will enjoy your stay in Gdansk. The weather is nice at least, right? And I would also like to greet all the participants. And I hope there will be more of you during the day as events start developing. And I would also like to greet several listeners in other places in Poland. You can see that on the screen up there, there's a university in Olsztyn, there's the Jagiellonian University in Kraków, right? Happy to see you. And some people in Toruń as well, at the university there. So this is a bit of an experiment because we're for the first time using these facilities here to beam everything which happens on here in this conference hall to other places in Poland. And I hope this will happen more often in the future. As we get used to it, we will also learn to share interesting events happening in Kraków, in Toruń, in Olsztyn, and also here. Right? So we'll be seeing more of this in the future, I'm sure. Right? What else can I say? Well, I hope this will be a truly beneficial occasion for all the participants, and yes, I hope you will enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much. And just one more thing. I'd like to thank Mr. Jacek Wasik, right? How could I forget? For making this whole meeting today possible. Right? Without him, this wouldn't happen. Okay, thank you.
Dzień dobry, good morning. Actually, it's the European Commission and in particular the Directorate General for Translation of the European Commission, thanks to which this event is possible. And I would also like to thank the University of Gdańsk, without which, and especially without Professor Kubiński, Professor Kubinska, Professor Violeta Karbacka and Maciej Kur, this event wouldn't be possible definitively. Because they had the most difficult parts, and my participation was very limited, especially considering the fact that it was at a distance, as I am based in Warsaw. I represent the Directorate General for Translation in Poland within the representation of the European Commission in Poland. This conference is one of a series of events taking place around Europe in the framework of the Translating Europe workshop. The Translating Europe is an initiative of the European Commission launched a few years ago, and it's meant to create a community of common interests and to raise the profile of the world of translation. As you might know, the translation services of the European Commission are the biggest ones in the world. That's why the European Commission considers the profession of a translator as a very important one. And these events are also has also an objective to show students of translating studies and young translators that it might be a profession that can give them satisfaction and also a good position on the labor market. So that these events are also meant to help you to enter this market. And I have to also mention that within this project, the Translating Europe project, this is already the 4th event at the University of Gdańsk, if I count well. So let me thank again all the university staff for this cooperation, and I have to say that among all the universities in Poland, we cooperate. The University of Gdańsk is the most active. I would like also to thank all our speakers. Some of them made long journeys, very long journeys, to join us today. I would like to thank the participants, also the participants in Kraków, Toruń, Olsztyn. Thank you for joining us today. And to conclude, I wanted to inform you that during the lunch break, we'll have an info stand. My colleague from the representation will provide information on traineeship programs at the European Commission and at the representation. Traineeship programs for translators, but not only. So all of you interested in having information on this, there will be a special stand outside, I think, the conference room where you can get this information. So thank you again and have fruitful discussions.
Ewa Kościołkowska-Opońska is going to moderate our plenary session, which we are all very excited about. So I think I will just give the mic to you now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, all the universities. I would like to first, of course, I'm sorry, I take this opportunity to greet Toruń as my university. So hello. And I would like to also to greet Olsztyn and Kraków. And I think that it's high time that we started our discussions. So please welcome our very first speaker, Mr. Martin Hüllegård from the University of Aarhus, who will be talking about, let me see, I'm sorry for this. Seizing the middle ground between translation and copy editing towards a new role for the medical translator, an ethnographic perspective on the translation of medical research articles. So please, take the floor.
Okay, thank you all for inviting me to talk at this conference. It's a privilege and honor. And I think the pressure is extra high because I'm the first plenary speaker. So I will take it from there. Now the program is, as you can see on the screen. Now, I once read that knowing 2 languages does not make you a translator, just as having 2 hands doesn't make you a pianist. And somehow I like that because it reminds us that there's much more to translation than just 2 languages. As translators, we bring a large bag of knowledge to the game. We are linguistic and cultural mediators. We have the communication skills to educate people about what we do, and we may even help them better understand the issues at hand. So, having the skills to educate professionals to become better communicators is perhaps for us an important point. Now, my presentation here today is not a classic one in the sense that I will be theory-based, nor is it based on a comprehensive set of empirical data. Now, I want to take a slightly different approach. I want to look back and to give you a small personal account of my 30+ years in translation of medicine, focused on the medical research paper. So, I know this may be a narrow point of departure and a narrow focus, but I think some of the lessons I've learned may, hopefully, apply to others as well. Now, it started out with what we could call the equivalence paradigm. It started out with what we could call the equivalence paradigm, where I would spend on establishing equivalence. But this was in the old days. I think today we are facing new, exciting opportunities. Now, I started out as a freelance translator, and I thought it was quite simple. All I needed then was appropriate language skills, a typewriter, and some idea of how to find clients and keep on to them. But I soon realized that that would probably not lead to a very comfortable and wealthy life. So rather than staking everything on freelance translation, I sought a job at the university, at the business school at that time. I became a part-time teacher on top of that. And I became a researcher too. And I think being a researcher is probably not something very dumb thing to do when you are a translator. As a matter of fact, I think it's a good idea because it allows you to share with the sorry, we need to go back a little. Okay. No, it's fine. I think that being a researcher yourself is absolutely okay because it gives you the advantage of knowing the persons for whom you translate. You sort of share their lived experiences. Now, I also realized soon that being a medical translator, I needed more than just language skills. I needed to access the world of medicine. And how could I do that? What were the possibilities? Well, I think I was lucky because I learned at that time that the Oval School of Business, where I was employed, had acquired a box of cards, handwritten cards through medical terms, from a late professor. And that was an opportunity. So I negotiated access to turn that box of cards, handwritten cards, into a dictionary. And I contacted the one of the leading publishing houses, and that publishing house had been approached by a professor of medicine approximately at the same time, and they thought we could work together. And that was a brilliant idea. So the first dictionary came into being in the mid-80s as a collaboration between me as a linguist and researcher and a professional in the field. And that was good. So in that way I could access his knowledge of medical terminology. He also had a fair command of English, so that was actually a good match. Now, what I learned here was at least one thing. You need, if you want to make a career in medical translation, to work closely with the medical professionals. You need simply continuous collaboration. That early journey from handwritten cards to a dictionary, well, I think it took about 10 years. But it only lived for a number of years. Why is that so? Well, now, 2 years later, after the dictionary was issued, I sometimes think nostalgically about those days, about my debut as a lexicographer. Those were easy days. But the dictionary, as I said, has disappeared. It's no longer used a lot, the printed dictionary. And as researchers, I think we need to move with the tide. And the tide comes rapidly. Translation has gone through a lot of development over the past 10 to 15 years. We see increased connectivity, we see increased collaboration. So, importantly, can we and should we as translators be on the forefront of that development, that technical development? I don't think we can be. How can we possibly compete technologically at universities with large players like Google and Microsoft? That is not possible. But still, we need to have a focus on the terminology in medicine. We need to keep updated. And keeping updated with terminological developments in medical science is a fight. It is a big fight. And you need to collaborate with medical professionals to keep up. You have to collaborate closely with them. And I think, so, having been there for a number of years, that it is a fight. It is a steep hill we have to climb to keep abreast of terminological developments. Okay. So we must move with the tide. We must embrace, we must understand connectivity and sharing. And perhaps it's not just enough to collaborate with a single medical professional. I soon found out that that wasn't enough. I needed to become a knowledge broker. I needed to find some position for myself between lots of professionals having specialized knowledge within each of their own fields. I had to create a forum for terminology exchange. And isn't that what we are all doing somehow as translators? Standing there at the junction between different crossroads, standing between different people with different kinds of knowledge. I think it is. And if we understand that unique position, I think there are new opportunities. But I still haven't completely abandoned the idea of making something technological to manage the terminology. So I decided to go digital. To create what I call a virtuous knowledge spiral. Working with the ideas of Ramach and Takeuchi, we built a software system that allowed corporations and academic fields to codify, check down their terms in the process of creating a text, the process of creating an English language text from a Danish language point of departure. And then we allowed them to share that terminology with us as linguists and medical professionals in a small editorial board. So we created what I call a terminology flower, where the core is in the center. We basically put all the medical terminology from the printed dictionary into a digital core. And then we have companies in the petals. We have academic institutions in the petals working with their own terminology and allowing us to approve it and make it available in the common core. And that tool, devised in the early 90s and coming into operation in the mid-90s, was actually okay. It worked. So it embraced the need for structured data, for providing input, for validating linguistic contents, and sharing it between the users. But this was 15 years ago. And if I look at the situation now, I can see that this software for terminology sharing one of the first of its kind, it worked. It worked quite well. I was a little wrong about the dates. It's been working well since 2006. Sorry. But what I see is that now we mostly have independent translators and academia as parts of this setup. The language industry has slowly withdrawn. And why have they withdrawn, the last players in the field? Well, I'm afraid the answer is quite simple. Technological development. Today, there are lots of systems out there available for managing and supporting user-based terminology and for sharing terminology. And we couldn't compete anymore on technical development. Now, we are in a situation here where we can see that we have commercial software, for example, MemSource Cloud, which far outcompetes us on technological performance. We can also see that the cost of translation declines and the speed of translation increases. Now, what are the consequences of this for us as translators? Well, that's difficult to say, really. I can't say in general what technology does to translators, but if I look to my small area of the world, that of medical translation, and look to the independent sole translators, I can see that they become fewer. Also, they work often on a project-by-project basis, they work in isolation, and they work at a distance. So, they are under competition as a consequence of the globalization and the corporate restructuring processes. So should we give up being translators then? No, I don't think so. We should bow to the pressures of technological change. Rather, let us bring some of the other competences into play. Why not draw on the entire bunch of things we can do? Okay. Now, what is the future for the translation industry? Where do we go from now? Recognizing that there are tough times ahead for us as individual translators. Well, there are a number of developments, and I would start out by saying we still have an upper hand as far as it comes to quality. Machines can't beat us on that yet. But if I look to what is happening out there, I see that computers certainly beat us on consistency across a large number of texts, and for sure they beat us on speed. Now, the future for the translation industry, well, what is it? I want to point to two ongoing developments that are probably going to shape our future as translators. One is the development of the semantic web. The idea that you can instantaneously translate multilingual web pages and make searches and information retrieval in any language you want to. This is one of the coming developments which I'm sure will shape our profession a lot in the coming years. Another one is the idea of interactive web. That is, web pages that don't just change language, but where voice is part of it too. The idea is that pages will automatically adjust their text to the language of the speaker. So if you went to a medical device company's page, you would be greeted by, for example, a voice speaking to you in Chinese. And if you said, I don't understand, it would change into names. We cannot, as translators, possibly compete with translation of that kind. From text to voice, voice to text in matters of seconds. Of course we can't. So, does that mean that there will be no need for us as competent, good translators in the future? No, I don't think so. I think there will always be a demand for quality translators, but without looking too much into the crystal ball, let me suggest an expanded role for the translator. A role that takes into consideration the fact that much of the text we will see in the future will probably be pre-translated texts, even within highly specialized domains like medicine. So what is the future for us as translators? Well, I think there are many opportunities out there. I think there are opportunities for us to add value to our services, to draw on the full spectrum of competences we have. If we dare take that middle ground between, for example, translation and copy editing. And I say so because in societies at large, we see a large number of newcomers to academia. And my claim is that many of these newcomers need precisely what we can do. Many of the newcomers, well, they are not accomplished academics, researchers who already have an academic career. They don't need us as translators. They don't need us to help them translate their medical research papers. No, the newcomers are either medical professionals who have been working in the field for a number of years and now need to or want to add research on top of their other activities. Also, a large number of newcomers to medical science come from university colleges, when the professions are transitioning into academia, nursing, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, midwifery, among others. And their writing skills are rarely outstanding. They struggle producing scientific texts, even in their mother tongue. They struggle for several reasons. First of all, because being a newcomer in a field with little tradition for academic writing, well, they may be facing problems of simply coining terms. Through our knowledge of medical terminology and how terminology is created, how new terms are coined, I think we can help them at the level of the lexicon. Second, they don't master the style of academic writing because disciplines transitioning into academia. Well, there aren't many articles there, and there may not be established discoursal conventions for newcomers to copy in that field. So what we may do as translators of medical research articles is to look to other more established fields and to help them do in Rome as the Romans, help them adopt the language conventions of scientific writing. Now, I also think that we could add to that a teaching element. Why not, when we do translations for them, why not tell them that we cannot simply translate the source language texts into English? We need to tell them how we must change the texts for those texts to succeed. I think we must take responsibility here. Responsibility for the target text functioning in the target context. Now, if we don't, what is the result then? Well, if as a researcher you don't get published, you perish. And if they, our potential new clients, don't get published, they won't become our clients for very long. Now, the other side of that is that if we manage really to help them publish, they become much devoted to us. They see our competences, they become our clients, and we do there have a new role to play. So, adding to these two new roles, I think we need to ask the question, how can we possibly become copy editors while also being translators, and how extensive should that copy editing be? And perhaps how can we teach our clients to become good writers? Now, I think that we may here look to genre theory I think genre theory is productive. It's productive because it tells us, or because it supplements traditional translation studies by adding a socio-cultural, a socio-professional perspective that takes into account the insights and practices of those who work with the texts within their environments. And these practices are reflected in what we could call external constraints of how texts are structured. And we have a duty to communicate to our clients these constraints. Now, we see these constraints, among others, in the fact that there are research design-specific guidelines that are conventionally followed by trained medical writers. If you make a randomized study, you use the consort guideline, which tells you specifically what to put into the materials, and methods, and results sections. If you make a systematic study, you follow the PRISPA guideline, etc. Expository parts of scientific papers, like the introduction and discussion, we don't get much help there. But still, they do say something. Introduction, give the background and the rationale and the specific objectives of the study. And for the discussion, mention the limitations, the generalizability, and how results are interpreted. So these things must obviously be in the papers and be there in that order. We need to tell novice writers in science that this is how they should structure their papers. But there are more external constraints. There are also what we could call the journal guidelines, telling how the introduction should be structured and how the discussion must be structured. So we need to take that into the equation as well. But this is only part of the game. There are also conventions. Conventions as to how the structures are. And if I look to the writing conventions in introductions and take that as a simple example, then according to genre theory, Swale's cast model, creating a research niche, we see that we prototypically have three sections, moves he calls them, in an introduction. Introduce the research area, you create a niche, and you occupy that niche. And you do so using various steps. And similarly, for the discussion, there's a set number of elements that must go into the discussion. Now, for each of these sections, there are prototypical ways of formulating, for example, the presentation of the results, the discussion of the generalizability. And that combination of structural requirements and prototypical language ways of writing about these structural elements, that is part of our knowledge as translators of research articles. But why not bring that knowledge into play? Now, when then do we bring that knowledge into play? Well, first, I need to say I think we have a duty to do so. The question is, should we bring our knowledge into play during the translation or after? Well, what is my experience here? I need to lean on that because I think very little is so limited to realign the text to go into a copy editing mood. Of course, depends on the stage at which I see the text. My options for adding more dimensions to the traditional row are, of course, bigger if I come in early. But as a translator, I'm usually involved late in the stage of production of the text, that is, after it has been produced. So there I am, faced with a text on research, meant to be published, which I know will not be published, because it doesn't have the structure it should have, and it doesn't apply the language that is customarily used. Well, in that situation, I usually make a loyal translation of the source language text. How can I do otherwise? But I add on top of that explanations of how the source language text could and should be improved linguistically and structurally in order to be publishable. In short, I flag my concerns. I need to. And I flag my concerns in various ways. I, first of all, say, how should the structure be changed? And looking at this screen from the left side, I use genre theory. This is a small example from the last section of an introduction, where the two moves are create the research niche and occupy the niche. And what I have in the second column is the translator's source text. And you can see in the create the research niche, there are just 2 meager lines. And that's not enough. I look through the manuscript, I see the reasons for making this piece of research are many. And I need to put them into the text. So I make a copy-edited version of that particular section of the introduction, drawing on both my knowledge of the research conventions, how you write up your research, and that particular that particular author's text. And I suggest then, how should the final move, that of stating your aim, be mentioned? And I add teaching notes in the right-hand column. Now, sometimes those who ask me to translate their research articles become slightly baffled. What is this? And they go back to their supervisors and they say, oh, do we have a problem here? Sometimes the supervisors acknowledge the existence of a problem, but occasionally in these disciplines transitioning into academia, they don't acknowledge that. They run away because there's serious face loss at stake here. But rather than saying, oh, that was a shame, why not take on a dual role, that of teaching not only the researchers writing up their first research papers, but also their supervisors how to structure texts? Why settle for the lowest level? Why not go after the supervisors as well? I think we can do that. So I negotiate extra services in this situation, and I take what extra teaching opportunities there are. And the teaching opportunities consist very simply in telling them how to structure their texts. And that can be done, for example, here, on the first, where I show the first of 4 steps of how to write a good introduction. And that starts from the bottom, asking, what is the aim of the study? That gives the researcher the last part of the introduction, the aim statement. Once the researcher knows what to do, we ask, why are you doing that? That gives the researcher the research niche. A couple of words there. Just a couple of key words. And then afterwards, the researcher writes up the first part of the introduction, thematically focused, to bring the reader to understand the niche and on to the aim statement. So what I'm trying to say here is that in 30 years in translation studies, I have seen things change a lot. From the handwritten card to the printed dictionary to online text and terminology repositories that are used both for managing terminology in-house and for commissioning new jobs. I've seen disciplines transition into academia. We have a knowledge society today where lots of people have to write about their science. That gives us new opportunities if we act as mediators, standing there at the crossroads of different knowledge domains, the crossroads of different agents, functions, processes, and products. In short, I think that as translators, we are an essential connector in a multi-tiered and multi-layered global knowledge landscape. Why not embrace that opportunity and acknowledge that technology is doing part of the trick, but it can never replace the human brain. Technology will never make us superfluous. We have new roles as translators. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your applause. The presentation was absolutely perfect timing, and because of your absolutely perfect timing, we've got, 12 minutes for discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much for this really wonderful presentation. Coming from a non-European country, I apologize for that here, coming from Switzerland, but being of German origin. So I would like to ask you, how does it work in your country? You mentioned, amongst others, the coining of new terms. And I remember years ago when there was still Hoffmann-La Roche in Switzerland, they had a kind of committee which was a mixed committee between academia, their own company, and the National Service for Registration for Medicaments, in order to coin new terms. And they sat together. Of course, this was very time-consuming, and somehow it vanished, unfortunately. How is this handled in your country? I would like to know it. Once I have the mic, I don't stop. Sorry. One more question, a very pragmatic question. We are in touch with a Chinese company, and they are collecting language big data for translation on a national level and international level. And would there be any kind of possible collaboration in your interest? Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question. Well, the first thing here, the coining of medical terminology, is really an intriguing question. In Denmark, we have a committee established by the National Board of Health, where we have a number of linguists sitting. I think the current number is 6. I used to sit on that committee, and I sat there for 8 years. And apart from the linguists, there are medical professionals and there are administrators. And the whole idea was to establish a common core of officially sanctioned medical terminology that should be used in all electronic patient files and in all hospital systems. That was a massive undertaking, which involved different professionals and continuous collaboration, and also involved the clash between what we in the board could agree this would ideally be the right term to use here. The clash between that attitude and that of the practitioners, the medical professionals out there who thought, oh, they knew better. They wanted to use their own terminology, so we had a new concept being coined, one thing in the board, but actually being used differently, or being another term out there in practice. That project is still ongoing. And I think it's so difficult to regulate the terminology. You can't do that from the top. You need to take whatever terminology comes from the bottom and then reach some sort of agreement, allowing some sort of deviance from the agreement as well. Now, pragmatically, working as a translator myself in new fields, I usually sit down with the author at my dining table and we discuss things. and he or she points me to foreign language literature on the same topic. And we agree that this is what we should call it. But it requires in situ collaboration with the medical profession. Otherwise, we can't possibly come up with a right term to use in a particular context. We can't. So being a translator here involves intimate collaboration with the professionals. I don't know if that answered your first question. Okay, good. As to the second one, the creation of texts, I think there could be an opportunity there. The Danish National Board of Health has a very, very large text bank, and I still have inroads into that community. So maybe we could negotiate something there. I would definitely be open to that. Yes, okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. It will be a bit tricky now. A Polish perspective. What is the attitude to translators in your country? Because my personal experience is that, for instance, medical doctors refuse to give bibliography when they send me a text, money, because they believe that if they put bibliography, I will charge them more because of all the characters there that I need to count. And of course, I need bibliography to check extra texts, to check vocabulary and so on. And also, if I try to do the copy editing that you are talking about, they think I'm patronizing them. So is that the attitude in your country, or is it a Polish sort of speciality? That, I mean, we are treated basically medical translators. If you don't have a personal relationship with the author of the article, we are treated just as language conveyors. And this is a very difficult thing to negotiate with doctors, to tell them, look, this is not well written, or you need to change that.
Thank you for that question. Reaching a little bit back in time to one of my first encounters with a medical professional whose text I had revised, really shows the problem, I think. It was the dean of the medical faculty whose texts I had revised, and he rang my door in my apartment a Sunday morning at 10. He was standing out there. He hadn't advertised he would show up, and I felt that I was sort of being in problems there. We sat down. He wanted to talk to me. It was just like in Lion King. I need to talk to my son. That was how I felt in that particular situation. I felt embarrassed, potentially humiliated. But we sat down at my dinner table and we talked about the text. And he left an hour later, and he continued to send me texts. But clearly, there was professional face loss at stake. He needed to see the bloke who had fiddled with his text because he thought it was absolutely perfect as it was, him having the precision he had. But no, if we tell them why we change texts, and if we let them see how their text can be improved, then I think we have a chance. Not just a chance, I think we have a business. And let me give you a small example of what this is business-wise. I started this 30 years ago. I never advertised it, not at all. I simply began, whenever I got a translation of a medical research paper, to do like I'm telling you here. And today, I think I have 30 revisions for every translation I have. And the idea of teaching young researchers how to write is absolutely one that has struck a chord, not just with the individual clients, but with the health faculty as well. So therefore, I teach around 300 PhD students in groups of 20 in compact courses how to write up their science. So gradually, the recognition is dawning on people that you can't be an expert in multiple things. And writing isn't a generalist competence, it is a specialist competence. And it's just as okay to recruit specialists to help you there as it is within statistics or what have you. So, but those space laws should be managed, and there are relations to be established for this to happen. You need to show them that you're a professional in your field. Otherwise, they won't respect you and they won't pay you. And then you won't have the business that you want to have. Sorry, it's as simple as that.
The attitude.
Yes, the attitudes are different. They're different cultures. But trust me, many doctors in Denmark think they are God too. Yes, they do have a say on life and death in some situations, yes.
Thank you very much for your communication. Translators as co-editors. I think this reminds me of what happened in another field, namely in technical documentation. And they already found out that it's a good idea to bring the translator in when they develop new machines and products.
Yes.
So, and then they cooperate. So they found the enterprises and they want to earn money. And they found out that this is of importance. Our problem is now, I'm coming now from the teaching side of my faculty at University of Mainz. How can we bring this into our curricula? When and where? This is our problem. And then the second question is, there's always this question of coining technology. This is quite, to a certain extent, I think it's quite easy within Europe. But I remember now, I'm coming from the Arabic world, terminology. They coined lists of terminology in all fields. But the practitioners, not the practitioners, they don't use it. Because of different history, of the histories of the field. This is always a problem. And in this case, how about making use of this trend to using corpora in translation? Maybe, do you use corpora and to what extent? Yes. Maybe
Yes.
in the afternoon we can come to another. Those things of technophilia and technophobia.
Okay, thanks a lot. As to the question of when and how to bring the idea of copy editing into the curriculum of translation, I understood that was the question. Yes, I think as early as possible actually, because if we teach our translation students that they should be translators in the old-fashioned way, I think they will become immensely frustrated. So why not tell them as best we can what the real life scenario is? So I think they should be introduced to this idea very early. You know, that was a short answer. But also, I think that we should, maybe as translators, knowing something about the rhetorical conventions in science, maybe we should be part of the scientific environments too. Maybe we, as translators and teachers, should teach in medicine how they should write their texts. We have actually begun to do that. We have, in 2 different places, sort of more later about that. Now, as to the conflict between the lists of terms being made on boards and by committees, as opposed to the actual language being used in practice, I think we have just one option: to climb down to the Tower of Babel and go out there and work with the professionals in their communities. Because we will never be able to regulate their terminology. It's created on-site, in situ, so to say. So we must be there too. We must accept that what we believe is perfect may not be what actually works in practice. And as to the question of corpora, Well, when I made the dictionary, I read tons of dictionaries, and I made a cobbled corpora, and it was an exceedingly boring task, one thing, and I don't think that's how it works today. I think that we have online very, very large dynamic repositories, terminology repositories and text banks growing by the day. So in practice, when I translate, for example, I use Springer Exemplar. The German publishing houses made all their articles publishable and searchable. So I use existing corpora to check out what real language usage there is, and use that as my guide for suggesting new equivalent heads. I don't know if that makes sense.
And the last question.
Sorry, it's not really a question, just a comment, because in Geneva what I did, and I think it very often is personal initiative and the chemistry which has to work between the Faculty of Medicine and the Faculty of Translation. So on bachelor's level I could ask my students to be invited at the medical faculty with the first year students in order to learn about anatomy, everything, and they were allowed to come over as a matter of fact, how to write their papers, how to look into things, and I think this was very fruitful, but it belongs, and I think it's all over the world the same thing. This is a little bit what Professor Forstner just asked about when to and how to integrate things into a curriculum. I think you cannot force these things, to my thinking, but if you have personal initiative, it sometimes works for a short period, but it does. I don't know what you did in this field. I think you work a lot together with others too now.
Yes, briefly. I know I have a top moderator.
Very briefly.
Basically, you need to be able to navigate both environments, both medicine and the humanities and translation. And you need to build personal relations, because that's where things start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martha, once again. We started so well with our, I would say, very dynamic discussion, and I would like to ask Hannelore Lianke to take the floor as our second plenary speaker. So please welcome Hannelore Lianke, the Director of the Multilingual Department at the School of Translation and Interpretation of the University of Geneva. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers very much for inviting me here. And as I said just before, coming from a non-European country. So I would like to thank once more my previous speaker, because he has touched upon very many points which I feel very, very important, and about which I react in a very emotional and enthusiastic way. So I would like to, before I start with my real paper, I would like to come up with, thank you. So you mentioned a couple of keywords which I would like to take up now. One is skills, collaboration, and I would go one step further with the collaboration, talking about interdisciplinarity. The other one is innovation and research. So my paper will be slightly about that. Medical translation, it has a very long history. You all know this, especially also the students. And this morning I had the chance of meeting a colleague, a very young colleague, who remembered a book by Mr. Henry Fischbach about medical translation, and I said, oh, that was 150 years ago. And there is another one which I would like to recommend here, because I think it's the only very exhaustive one about eponyms by Henri van Hoof. So why is medical translation very important? Because it's not only because it's so old, but I think this was Henri van Hoof who mentioned it, because it touches the human body and it touches everybody. I mean, it's our interest. I think that's very important. And as you can see here, I would like to talk about two things. One from the theoretical point of view, which has been discussed in theoretical papers, books a lot. Do you have to be a medical doctor, or can you just be a translator in order to translate medical texts or any kind of text? We know they go from publicity to legal issues, and it's a very large variety. Now, here I come, and please allow me one word about my personal history, which is very short because I'm very young. After I finished my first studies at the University of Geneva, I was with a German passport in Switzerland looking for a job, and there was a pharmaceutical company, and they were looking for a bilingual doctor. And so I applied. I said, I'm neither bilingual nor a medical doctor, but I would be very interested to have this job. So they answered me very briefly and shortly that I was not really their profile. 3 months later, the same ad was again in the newspaper. And then I said, as you know, I'm interested, and I'm still interested. So they had me come over. And then they said, you know, this is a very high function, you have to make a kind of psychoprofessional test, and there are 17 other candidates, and they're all scientists, and you are the only one non-scientist. Okay. So I passed the test, and I got the job. Why is this important? Not because I'm such a smart person. It is important, I think, for the students to know, and this is the first key word to mention, skills. We are not specialists in any fields when we have finished our university studies as translators and or interpreters. But I think we are specialists in skills. And I think this is very important, and you showed this very nicely. So I just want you to know that this is my starting point for having this kind of interest in medical translation. Now, many things have changed. You have mentioned this change in the environment, in the work environment, and also the different tools and things. But I think also from the geopolitical point of view, many things have changed. We have this huge number of migrants, we have tourists, and we have this kind of new political settings. And wherever we go, we will need maybe interpreters, maybe translators also within the framework of hospitals. Now, I once had to go in Shanghai to an ophthalmological clinic, and I was very worried because I thought, you know, I can't communicate with the medical doctor, but then he did his studies in Heidelberg and spoke beautiful German, so that was a funny thing, and I enjoyed that very much. No need for an interpreter there. Now, after this parenthesis, when we train translators and interpreters, I think the first thing is to take the fear from them about this kind of medical field. Because medicine, strangely enough, my students, they were always very worried. They were not worried within the field of economy, of law or law, but they were afraid because of medicine. They thought they could never make it. So when you are afraid of something, you should get acquainted with what are the difficulties you may encounter. So here are the difficulties. Sorry, I didn't follow up. My technical knowledge is prehistoric. So, of course, terminology, you have all those Greek or Latin terms. You have the language register, and the language register is something very, very important. It depends, of course, also on your target public, what you are doing. During my professional work as a director of this translation section of the pharmaceutical company, one day I got, my boss sent me a book for people who are selling pharmaceuticals to medical doctors. It was written in Australia and it worked perfectly well. The turnover went up, everybody, each company using this. And then he told me you have to translate it into German, French, Spanish, Italian. I said, it doesn't work, can't translate it. He said, why? You know German? You know German. It's not the same. The whole thing was made for an Australian public. It's exactly what he said. So it was this person who wanted to sell the medicaments, came in, said to the professor, doctor, I don't know what, tapping on his shoulder, hi Jack, how was your night last night? If you do this in Germany, or in Spain, or in Italy, or in France, you are kicked out immediately, and your turnover doesn't go up, it goes the other direction. So to make this understood to people who think they know everything is very difficult. We had this very nice example. So I didn't translate it. Okay. Then is the question of the acronyms, the abbreviations, which in this field, I mean within the field of medical text is very important, especially if you have articles, you have reports, you have letters from health insurance or after accidents and all this. So this is very important. And then eponyms. I just mentioned the book by Henry van Hoof, which I found very helpful when I was working. Eponyms are proper names given to, like you have Alzheimer's disease or anything, you have the Broca and the Wernicke zone in our brains, responsible for our language section. So you don't necessarily always keep these proper names. So I think it's important for students to know this, to do some kind of research. Because it happened, for instance, with the AIDS virus, that somebody in France and somebody in an English-speaking country discovered the virus at the same time, and there were huge disputes how to call it. So I think there are a couple of things like that. Then the subject matter knowledge, of course, is important, and pre and suffixes. All these things can be learned rather easily. We can have the help of the languages of LSPs here. Languages for special purposes which we have here, and I think this is very important because we can see here the specialized terminology which I just mentioned, language register which is very important, and subject matter knowledge. And in order to understand and not necessarily to go all these vast bibliographies which are existing, we can see why this is so important. Here, technical terms, derivations, abbreviations, all this, you can read. I don't need to go into details. Now, maybe to the last item here, English terms. I would like to say that many terms, for instance, in technical fields like RN, tomography, all this, you have a lot of English terms. And these English terms are being kept in very many other languages. By the way, if ever you need to have a concise glossary on tomography, I can give you one, which is the only one which has been also sponsored by the European Commission at the time. At the time it was still called nuclear magnetic resonance. Now, what is a help for students and learners is when you kind of divide these languages for special purposes in sciences. So here you have one side, natural sciences, applied sciences, which are of interest to us here because you have medicine, you have pharmacology, you can read all the things, and then you have also social sciences. And some of these social sciences, such as law, is very, and now also economy, becomes very closely linked to medicine. Because there is a lot of interdisciplinarity going on, a lot of research between the two. I would just like to mention one thing within the framework of economy, where there's a lot of research on a substance called oxytocin, and which is the substance which creates confidence in the others. It's a substance which is mainly released by breastfeeding mothers, and now it's used, I mean, it sounds very terrible, but it's like this, it's used in economy for brokers and financial people in order to make their clients more confident in them. And this is not illegal. So just to mention a few things and how we can go on to familiarize us with the medical field. Then there's of course the public service interpreting in the framework of police stations, in the framework of hospitals. And by the way, at the end I should come to quote a couple of issues from a little booklet which has been adapted into many languages already within the framework of hospital interpreting. So all these issues become more and more important. And coming back to the question just before, how to integrate in the training, in the curriculum, medical translation, it is very difficult. I think it's difficult because, first of all, our university administration doesn't like to change, and then they want to see how many people are really interested. Students, maybe in the very beginning, they cannot be interested because they just think it will be very difficult. So it can't work. So I think it's very difficult unless we create something like on an interdisciplinary level within universities where we have different types of faculties and where they could work together. And I think this is a possibility. For public service interpreting, in order to enhance issues, one can also, amongst others, make play roles, which we did, and I think which worked very nicely. Another difficult point in the framework of medical translation is sometimes, depending of course on the language class, the so-called nominal style. And personally, I came across something where I made mistakes, and so I tell you here, these growing pains is not problems while growing. It's problems while growing because it's a special term, but it's not increasing pain. So one has to be careful. And I think with this kind of possibilities of prior knowledge to all the pitfalls, or many of them at least, one can go ahead if one is interested in the subject matter. There is another help which has been developed by Baumgarten some 15 years ago, and which is a kind of analysis and description of the specialized texts, any kind of specialized text. So you have this so-called three-layer approach, and I think this is something I don't want to go because we don't have much time, but you have here the scientific technical languages for special purposes, which is probably the one which is most interesting to us. On the other side, and we should come to that, the so-called vulgarized texts, which apparently are easier, are much more complicated. And we have to make our students know this. Because if you have a vulgarized text, and nice examples are in these medical journals, or which are which you can get in pharmacies, for instance, or also other publications such as the Scientific American, which you have in several languages and where things are being translated. This is something very useful, but you never know, because the writer, and we come back to your example, is not a specialist in the field very often, and he doesn't give the full information so that the translator afterwards can do a proper job. So really, vulgarized texts are much more difficult to my thinking. Now, again, one more point to the integration in academic settings. I think the only way out, don't know if you would agree, is interdisciplinary training. To have one person specialist of a field and the other one being a specialist in the skills of transmitting knowledge. We had the possibility, we did this only on master's level, with real practical work, with real projects which we entered into our classroom, where students did work, where they could publish also with their names, where they were paid for, and where we had specialists coming in to help us to do the right work. So I think this is a very good incentive, and it makes them work in a different way. Okay. So I go back, I continue. The challenges of interdisciplinarity. I think this is one of my hobby horses, you may have already noticed this, and I think it is a very interesting way, because we can, as you can see here, we start from the very beginning with the assumption and that we can participate and that disciplines can participate. You know, for instance, like psycholinguistics. Psycholinguistics has sprang up in the 1960s sometime, I don't remember the exact date now. There was a conference of psychologists and linguists, and they came up finally, they were working together, and we have this type of hybrid science, if you want to call it like this, is psycholinguistics. I think if we do teach, co-teach, at a certain level, when everybody has his or her basic knowledge already, then we can go on, and this is, to my thinking, very important. How can we do it? We can set up the kind of cognitive approach which is based on Bloom's taxonomy, which has been developed for the students. This was the Middle Ages, sometime in 1970, and it goes from knowledge acquisition up to evaluation. This is the best possible way how to structure a course in order that each student can build his or her knowledge in his or her own way in order that it remains. So, why should we have interdisciplinarity in T&I? I think we can on the one hand improve the teaching and learning effect, but also I think the personal interest of our students can be better developed. And I think that interdisciplinarity is, I think, the best framework, scientific framework, really, for our students to go out and to stand in front of others who will become medical doctors and really to know something about it. So training has to change, to my thinking, in many fields, maybe not at your university here or at your university, but at many universities, I think it should be changing. The question to when, I think we mentioned that already. Now coming from the University of Geneva, I must tell you that on bachelor's level we don't talk about really translation, not at all about interpretation, because people should get basics about the language. No language learning, but how to handle a language and subject matter knowledge, be it within the framework of law and economy. We have no special framework in medicine now. We had it before. And on master's level, we do then the real training with languages for special purposes, not before. Now, how to do it? Well, there should be the different difficulties, pitfalls I mentioned already, but also introduction of different specialities. And I allow myself here, I don't know whether you will be able, are you able to read this? So it goes from knowledge acquisition, so here you have from level 1 to level 4 and 5, and then it goes up to level 6, evaluation. So we have different teaching methods here, which are elaborated. Students do get this kind of setting before, at the beginning of each term, in order to know what exactly, which type of material is being used, which are going to be the activities, where they can do their own presentations. Also, they can bring their own subject matter texts if they wish to. So I think this has been proven to be quite useful. So the eponyms I mentioned already, but then maybe the kind of vulgarized languages for special purposes. I think it is important here to analyze the text construction. For instance, the translators or adapters really of the articles in the Scientific American, they were given very, very clear instructions, and they had a lot of liberty too. They could put subtitles where they found it was important for their target language. They had text construction and the form, the style, and everything, which normally is not the case. I mean, one doesn't necessarily give all this kind of helping hands to translators. So again, these vulgarized texts are a very big challenge, very difficult, because they are not very well written very often. And so you have to find your way through, and you're liable, especially if you are at the beginning of your career, to make many mistakes. And the target public, which normally is very clearly defined, especially in medical text, you don't have it very clearly defined there. It's Mr. and Mrs. everybody, and you cannot please Mr. and Mrs. everybody. No? So that's, I think. Now I come to something which I just mentioned in the very beginning. It's the healthcare interpreting. And I would like to let you know that this stems from a little booklet called Other Words, Other Meanings, written by Louis Luton and Alexander Bischoff. You can find it on the internet. You have several versions there. The original was in French. It's the English one. You can have a look afterwards. It belongs to Professor Forstner, so I must keep it very well. And you have even a Chinese version, and I think it is very useful. So now, he's they are both medical doctors, but Alexander Bischoff is somebody, they did exactly what you suggested, they worked together. He is a person specialized in writing medical texts, Alexander Bischoff. Professor Luton is a specialized in tropical medicine, and they work together with language professionals, with interpreters, and sought what can be held of. Actually, this booklet helped him for his interpreters all over the world, because he's in the field of tropical or international medicine. You have to go everywhere, and people are not trained. And we all know that using interpreters from the family for medical purposes, it's no good at all. We had, for instance, in Geneva at the hospital, a young girl of 11, Turkish origin. The father had a cancer of the prostata. Now, he didn't speak a word of French, and she was supposed to interpret it's impossible. So this kind of situations, recurrent situations, ask the doctors to do something different and to make a kind of training. This is the checklist. So culture is of course a very important issue within this framework. We shall come to that when you see some wonderful drawings. And one has to take care of the emotional factors of a patient, a person who is far away from home, who is in a very uncomfortable situation. The aspect of emotions also have to be handled, and very well handled. So here you have the doctor and the patient without the interpreter. So it's a very sad and unequal situation. And now you come to a kind of dialogue where the interpreter is somebody who helps, and he has a different role to play than any kind of conference interpreter. Conference interpreter just renders, but here the interpreter has a really very crucial role. Of course, they also have to be briefed, and they are being briefed beforehand. So, I mean, all this is not mine. The drawings have been made by I don't know whom, but I think they are very eloquent. And then you have situations suddenly where the patient and the interpreter, and they are talking, and like me now, and the doctor gets slightly upset because he doesn't understand, or the outcome is just one little sentence. And then, again, you see, they are getting angry. So the situation is not really a very happy one. And then you have the other possibility where the doctor talks all the medical terms and all the things and nobody understands, not even the interpreter who is trying to under the table. So And then one last picture, the cultural aspect. Family. Do you have family? So in probably our framework here as we are here today, family means maybe parents, husband, wife, I don't know, children, 1 or 2 children. But in other cultures, we all know it means, oh yes, I have family, my uncles, my aunts, I don't know, we are about 45, yes, I have family, And this reminded me, if you allow me, there was Umberto Eco used to write in l'Espresso every other week a small article, and he was one was an article, he was taking a taxi in New York, and the taxi driver was from Pakistan, and he said to him, where do you come from? Italy. Is it a big country? Not so big. Who are your enemies? And Eco said, no, we have no enemies. And then the taxi driver stopped the car, opened the door, said, you don't need to pay, but I don't want you. And then afterwards, Eco said, oh, by the way, but we have this and this and this and that. So here it's a little bit the same. You have this kind of very basic concepts which very often play a role, which we do not have to underestimate. Now, with this kind of interdisciplinary, collaborative approach, I think many things are being written, many things are being done. It means a lot of work, a lot of individual thing, and I come to the end. So if you like, there is a website from the Shanghai International Studies University, where last fall a Center of Interdisciplinary Research and Training has been founded, and on November 3rd this year there will be a conference. Thank you very much. Sorry for being so long.
Thank you very much once again. And now I'll try to do something to the light. Yeah, I did it. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for questions. If there are any questions that you want to ask to our speaker, please.
Oh, sorry, no, it isn't.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. I like a lot what you said about the need to work across disciplines. And surely there are barriers there. And I wonder if you could enlighten us on just a few of the main barriers and how to overcome them.
Thank you. Well, one of the main barriers, I think you have mentioned it already in your speech, because when you go to a medical doctor and you're a translator, I mean, you're just not like a cleaning lady, but some sort of, in Deutschen sagen wir Handlanger, so I don't know how to say that in English. But the thing is, when you can make them understood what you are doing by publications, by types of collaboration, and I always try to work, I say, I need your help. We did a lot of research in neurosciences. I mean, Switzerland is very easy to do this because we have many people who are multilingual. So I worked for 20 years with neuroscientists. I had major grants from the Swiss Research Institute in order to do bilingual research with interdisciplinary research. We did interdisciplinary research within the framework of emotions. At the time, we have a Center of Excellence on Affective Sciences in Geneva, and the then director was a German professor, he's also retired like me. But then I once went to him and I said, I think we could do something together, because emotions in a text, or emotions can also influence the way you translate and interpret. and he didn't think that very funny. But then it happened something, there was an article written about a piece of work, and then he called me and he said, oh, you know, I think we could do something together. And I never impose. So I think I try to make them feel that they are very important. They are very important, of course, because I mean, I don't have this type of knowledge, but I think I have one or two skills which can be helpful. And it's by this way and by trying to collaborate. And I started on the students' level because it was a very tough work to convince the dean of the medical faculty to allow my students to come to his faculty. And then I said, you know, they can come to us. He said, it would not be interesting to them. He said, I'm very frank. And I said, well, they can just try. And they stayed. And I had a young physicist, I mean, he had his PhD already. He was teaching also in the German department at the time in the University of Geneva. But it's not always like this. I think it's really based very often on a personal drive, also personal interest. If you urge the people to do something they don't want to do, it can't work. Because unless here you put your heart, blood and all the things, it's nothing will happen. So I think the first step is to show that you can be of certain interest and that it's good for the outcome. For instance, with this Professor Scherer, we published something in 8 languages, I mean the usual European languages plus Chinese, Hebrew and Arabic, on emotional studies, which was then used by the diplomats in Bern for their training, how to say certain things. Huh? If I ask you, like immediately you would be Chinese, I ask you, I would like to have dinner tonight with your Christian C. You're not going to say you're completely out of your mind, you send your brain on holiday or something, but you would say, I'll try my best. So I mean, this is a very simple example, but I think there are many, many issues like this. Thank you.
We still have, if you allow, 2 minutes for another question, the last question.
You mentioned knowledge as opposed to skills. We can all agree that knowledge is something that we can gain. And what about the skills? Do you think that they are a matter of talents, that they are inborn, or do you think that the skills that are needed for translations are something that we can develop from nothing?
I think, personally, I think you can develop skills. Of course, there are certain people maybe who would not be able to develop linguistic skills because they are not they are untalented in languages, in which case it's not possible. I mean, we in Geneva we have an entry exam, and where these kind of skills, language skills, are tested already, and then from then on, I think you can train them. Yes, definitely, and on a weekly basis. So I think this is very important. But you can't train all and everybody. Like not everybody can be trained to be an opera singer, I think. Thank you.
One extremely quick question, short one.
Thank you very much. It is very quick one. When you talk about your curriculum at MA level, language for specific purposes, and you combine language and introduction to the field, are you talking about a course in one field like medicine only, or do you combine with your students several courses like that? Meaning, for instance, language of medicine and introduction to medicine, language of law and introduction to law, language of business and introduction to business. Is it just devoted to one field or several at the same time?
Thank you very much for your question. I was not clear about that at all. So we one training which is very strong in economy, in the field of economy, and one in law. And there you have the language, you have the introduction, and you have subject matter knowledge, which in former times was given at the faculties, so we did work together. As far as medicine is concerned, there's another course called general translation. So in this general translation, you have people who would train a little bit of literature or something like this. But you have others who train, I mean, what I did always at least 3 to 5 months medicine or related, I mean, scientific text, because it is a need on the market. No, so the economy and law is not optional. And the other course, the general one, is a course which is given, but you can take, students can come or not come. So normally they like this type of course a lot. So, but it's so there are 3 main subjects. They have in total something like 12 hours of translation a week. Just.
May I add something to your question? I'm in my faculty, University of Mainz. So we offer 30 languages that are Polish to learn. But as far as medical translation is concerned, I think it's only in English and in French. So it depends on the language and on the staff. Most other languages concentrate on economy and law, but only in this case. It depends on the language.
Law and economy, everybody has to have it. You know, it's also a question, I think it's a really administrative question. Well, the market also needs it a lot. But what ideally should be done really is to co-teach with the faculties. So again, here, you know, it makes it much more interesting, but it needs more administrative stamina.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this discussion. And now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the first session. And we're going to have a coffee break that will last until 11 o'clock. So we'll meet here at 11 sharp. Thank you.
And our coffee break, snacks and coffee, 3rd floor, room 355. Be here at 11 o'clock, please. Okay. Yeah, we can continue all those interesting discussions upstairs. Oh, and Kraków, Toruń, Austin. I'll see you in half an hour, right? Okay, bye bye.
Yes.